I have three kind of subcategories of life that are somewhat unanticipated. Not everyone has to kind of think these situations or life scenarios through as an individual, but as a collective, it's probably not a bad idea for everyone to kind of have an idea of how to think about them. Um, Maybe just a random topic of discussion, and in the event that you know somebody who might be grappling with one of these questions, at least you kind of have a background idea of, well, I've thought about it. Maybe here's an idea we can talk about. So one of them is abortion. The other one's euthanasia, and the other one is special needs. Special needs could be an exceptionality where someone's really, really gifted, or someone is delayed or has some kind of developmental delay in some way. So sometimes having these discussions make it difficult for us to almost bring in God, because people will assume um, I want to have free will. I want to be able to think of the consequences for my personal body for myself without having to think that since God is all knowing and He knows my situation, He'll kind of punish me in a certain way, or there'll be some kind of negative impact for me metaphysically. And we're not God. We can never actually say that, someone who took their life, how they came back from life and what their life situation was. The more I think about these questions, the more I think, yeah, especially with like life cycles of birth and rebirth, how are we to really know? Like, if someone decided life is just really, really difficult for me right now, and they decided to kind of almost take that proactive step, as it were, and just take their life, like how do you try to understand that, and how is that different from someone who's really, really sick and decides I do want euthanasia? Like, it's different a little bit than suicide. I don't know. These are really difficult questions, and I like to grapple with them because I have the time, and I don't mind kind of sharing these views and kind of seeing what new ideas might kind of arise from them. So the first question typically is, if God is all knowing, why doesn't He kind of just give me an answer, or why are we created with all this suffering? Another kind of almost branch from this could be, why is there poverty in the world? Like, why is there homelessness? And excuse me, it's hard to answer these questions without thinking about the beginning of time and how God originally wanted to show His creative power, for example, right? Because you think, if you can bring this actually down to like a human level, is that when kids are bored, they figure out something to do. So when we take this back to existence, and you think, I want to think of a creation story, then okay, I'm going to try this. So you can think of, okay, there was Adam, and then he was lonely, and then God created Eve for him so that they have companionship, and they were told, you can do whatever you want in this garden, but almost as a way of helping them understand that you have free will. But because of that, there's good and bad, and for each, there's going to be consequences. So you have to learn how to think now, because this is why you were created as a human. You have this extra faculty that's not present in jinn, and it's not present in angels. So he says, just don't eat from this tree. Some narrations will say it's an apple tree, some will say it's a fruit tree, but it will just say it's a tree. So we don't know what's on this tree and what grows on it. Now imagine it's the tree of knowledge, because I talked about before how there is a lote tree where sometimes we can't really say why we understand something or how to approach something if we haven't really studied it. But sometimes preemptively, almost giving our initial ideas to ourselves, or like writing them down before we study them, kind of gives us an idea of how far off we are, or maybe what the general idea is around this subject, and then to compare and contrast, and kind of just evaluate things from that regard. So imagine that that tree was the tree of knowledge, right? So these are brand new creations. They're just learning about like what they can do. And then they decide, well, what is it about that tree? Like, I mean, it can't be that bad, right? And so then they go and then they try something, and maybe they're not ready for it yet. So then it becomes, well, you you now have to go through this entire, like, how many millennia to get to this final understanding of why you were created, and why sometimes you do have to have delayed gratification. Now, there is a door to heaven for those who fast or understand delayed gratification, that's called Rayan. And it's basically a door that if you enter it, you never thirst for anything ever again. So it's almost like your delayed gratification paid off, or it's almost like akin to what Buddhists believe as non-suffering, or like nirvana, you can say, is that you have healthy attachments, but with or without them, you have that inner peace, like this kind of contentment with life. So if you think back to the story of Adam and Eve, and they are, maybe they have attributes of learning, but they haven't learned everything yet. So they're understanding that they can grasp knowledge. God's teaching them words, like and talking with them. And then they're starting to build ideas about, okay, we can talk to, like maybe it's just a voice that they hear. And then they see um, in the garden, maybe they see live life, like animals in the form of jinn. Who's to say, really? Now, if we keep this original story kind of in the back of our head, and now we think back to present day where someone says, why is this person impoverished? Like, that's not fair. Why doesn't God distribute wealth evenly? You can think, well, okay, maybe from the beginning where Adam was kind of brought down to earth, he had all these resources available to him. And with time, we built up civilization, we took it down. People were trying to understand to what degree they're supposed to have influence on others, to what degree they want to control or enslave others. So naturally, there has to be consequences. So if someone was a tyrant, for example, in the past, they're going to have to come through more cycles of life and death to kind of understand that power and wealth, when they're misused, are removed from you. So now, but how is this person in their present day supposed to understand that? Well, maybe, thousands of years ago, I had a tyrannical ancestor. They don't know that. But that's why building these stories is sometimes helpful, to bring us a sense of inner calm. Like, we don't have to be angry. We can change our circumstance. And trying to understand these metaphysical meanings almost help us be proactive and not always be angry and just say, okay, well, that's fine. I know that I'll come back and I can try to come back in a better circumstance. So I'll start working at it now, right? And then I'm not feeling like I'm just like this passive agent in the world, as it were. So if you were to think of life and death, then you might want to think, what is the difference really? If I just equate life and death to wakefulness and sleepfulness, or like sleep and wake cycles, excuse me, then maybe it'll be easier to kind of grasp how immediate life is for me and opportunity is, and then I'll just kind of make the most of what I can. So think about abortion. Let's say I'm in my third year in university, and I'm really excited that I only have maybe like 2 or 3 semesters left, and I'm about to start my life, and who knows what happens after that. I can start to live on my own, and then maybe I'll meet somebody, and for whatever reasons I get pregnant, right? I don't know what this is going to actually do to my life moving forward, right? Because who's to say that this child's not going to be born with special needs, in which case I might have to pause my studies. Maybe I won't be able to find the healthcare, and I won't be able to manage my studies and like taking care of this new life. And what if I don't want to think about abortion because I don't know, maybe I won't, that's not something my consciousness will be able to live with. Like, if there's life that's potentially here, like, do I just take it away? Like, what authorities are? So these are really difficult questions. And when you think that when young adults are growing into their life and they haven't really thought of these questions, and then they're faced with them, like, how do they react, and how do they know how to react? And especially in some families or communities where these topics are still kind of taboo, it makes it even that much more difficult to try to figure out how to act moving forward. So one show that I watched, I think it's called Young Sheldon, where it's great because it talks about a lot of, I think it's like based in the 80s or the 70s, but it's a pretty recent TV show, and it talks about a lot of these things. Like, he talks, I think it's like the current version when they're adults is called The Big Bang Theory, I think. And in it they talk about a lot of these issues, like the traditional family, young pregnancy, Bible, and how to create like a scientific understanding of the Bible and the universe, but also kind of try to understand a metaphysical understanding. And then like what girls can grapple with as they're kind of building their this is what I can do, this is what I can't do, how are boys different than girls. So all these things are really, like, for me, if I had like a family, that would be something I'd want to watch together, because then it's just so much food for discussion. Like, you can talk about anything and it's relatable outside of anyone's immediate context, so they can kind of have that gap between, it's not going to be about me personally, but it's something for me to think about for the future. So from like my tradition and from what my understanding has been, typically if a person is pregnant, and sometimes people don't know until they're later in their pregnancy that they're expecting, Um, the suggestion is if you hear a heartbeat, you should continue your pregnancy till full term and then just deliver the baby. And then after that, I guess you have options. You can decide to put the baby up for adoption, or see if there's someone who's willing to help you raise your child. I don't understand how to think of this other than to go back in history. So we don't know the story about Mary other than that an angel visited her and then she ended up having a baby. So it's almost to say she didn't give up. Like she was like she could have just like decided I this is not something I can deal with. But she was inspired to just let the baby speak for her. And it did. So it's almost like, okay, so we can kind of go back in time and revisit this and bring it back to current times and think, yeah, I mean, people have children all the time, like at a young age, and they have supports in the world. Sometimes people choose abortion because they figure I already have kind of like a life path ahead of me, and this is kind of what I'm choosing because that's where my focus is. And it's difficult to understand where that's going to take them metaphysically. It's really, I hesitate to give any kind of judgment. But then think about people who don't have a voice. So think of some children who are born with special needs and they don't have anyone outside of like the adult that's taking care of them to have a voice for them. You might ask, like, I mean, how's that fair? Like, how do I reconcile what this is? Is this someone who maybe had a life and then it was taken away from them, and so this is almost like all of us thinking about how precious is life, and what do we have to kind of get to as a human collective, for example, to alleviate suffering? And is it possible? Like, are utopias a thing? These are really big questions, and I hesitate to think of utopia because it tends to kind of create a standard that looks perfect, and stepping outside of it almost creates a like, nope, you did it wrong, try it again. Whereas if you take a kind of eclectic approach and trial and error, and this is the way we are as humans, we're not angels, then I think it becomes a little bit like, oh, that's a lot easier to kind of grapple with and live with and continue to kind of evolve with. So I don't know where I would kind of draw a line for families that are traditional and are trying to come into like a postmodern world, like how big of a jump they should kind of make. But I think it would be enough to just have these discussions and maybe talk about tell me about some of the friends that at school with you and some of the struggles that they go through if your children aren't really necessarily going through any struggles just yet, or like find an analogy or a parallel with some of the shows that you watch. um, Sometimes also with having children with special needs, sometimes the distribution of responsibility and attention kind of shifts too. So there's a show called Atypical with a boy who's autistic, and again, it's also like the girl, she's going to college and she's trying to grapple with like her own identity and her sexuality, and then like maybe my parents aren't supporting me, and then they're kind of going through a divorce, and he like her brother seems to be taking all the attention, but at the same time she has this kind of protectiveness for him and she wants to help him. And like you think of Freaky Friday, the same thing, like siblings who kind of squabble but they still have that kind of affection for each other, and grappling with all that. It almost emphasizes that human bond, like regardless if we get along or we don't, there's always a way that we can find a way to almost reset and then find something that's going to be common that we can kind of agree on, and then move forward again, even if it's in different directions, but at least we're not walking away with like some kind of negative affect. And I can't really explain what that really does other than it's not very pleasant to think back in history and have um, negative ideas around people. Like the only thing that comes to mind when I think about this is sometimes when you have friends who are expecting, and people think about names, like they're like, oh, what do you think you're going to name your child? And sometimes they'll say, like they'll offer names, like, oh, what about this name? And oddly enough, they'll say, no, 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 I knew someone with that name, and no, I don't think so. And isn't that weird how our brain creates that association? Like you don't know how that changes and how that can change. And sometimes it does because you'll meet like several people with that name and your idea of it will change. Like you won't have the same association. So it's almost to say something that we almost form in our mind as an initial attachment or association, we can allow to evolve. So even if something does look like it's an immediate, like, no, I don't think so, allow it to try different scenarios in your mind. Like just play with it, like kind of like with children when we set up like different play centers, we call it like dramatic play, where you just try on almost different costumes and just allow yourself to be imaginative and creative and really really flexible with new ideas, because coming out of ingrained ideas, we we find it really hard to let go of right and wrong. Like we almost don't know how to get through gray areas to the other side. And it's encouraged in some contexts. If something is really, really gray and you already know what's certain and comfortable for you to do and what's certain and comfortable for not to do, for you to not do, then stay away from the gray area for as long as you can until you've kind of resolved it within yourself, so that you're not making any rash decisions and then unaware of like what the consequences may be. So currently, I don't really think we have much of an excuse anymore. Like 1400 years later, we have almost like everything at our disposal. We can travel anywhere, we can talk with anybody. We don't even have to go anywhere. We could be like in the comfort of like any place with just like an internet connection, and then find someone who maybe has a certain question or certain goals, or um, like you can create a Facebook group where you want, or like different forums and websites and such. Build a blog and talk about yourself and say what you're grappling with, or build like a YouTube channel. And all of these things are just meant to help us, almost ease the way for ourselves and for just like our neighborhoods to be able to understand what the educational process is. Because I feel like with like just the last few years and a lot of distant learning becoming a thing, technology being something that's really supported in classrooms with how children learn, um, it's almost becoming more of an option again for homeschooling or distant learning, or for people to decide I want to take a year off regardless of what age it is, and then um, have like homeschooling as an option, and just see like how comfortable am I with just going with what my inclinations or affinities are, and see what I learn. Because you'll hear, and we still do, you know, people who post comments and say, you know, where did I need to learn, or why did I need to learn calculus, for example? Like, where did I apply that in the world? Or trigonometry, or, but it's not the fact that why did you and will you need it in the future, but it's almost like having that foundation almost enables you in the future to decide, I learned this, and because I'm doing something in the world right now, I can refer back to what I learned and say, I think this is where this would apply. And then you kind of bring it forward. So you're not going way back into history and trying to understand something that's maybe out of like out of date language, and it's just that much more difficult for you to kind of bring to a contemporary context and apply. So then it's more readily available, and then you can review it, and it won't take maybe hopefully as long to jog your memory around it. So things like this where we kind of take for granted, or we kind of find it like drudgery work, like we don't really want to go through it, reinvigorating a sense of interest in learning, I think can come from allowing people to follow their interests initially. So not making it look like it's something compulsory and something that has to be graded and you have to fit a certain kind of mold, otherwise it's wrong. I think can help alleviate some of that tension and some of that stress that comes with studying, and kind of diminishes what the joy of it can bring.